Okay, so this is session number 4, derailleurs and chains and cables. Essentially just like the drivetrain, and then making it work. So, first thing we need to do is we need to talk about how this stuff works and what they are. So we've got the derailleurs right here, which are called derailleurs. And this is the front derailleur. It's going to go along like that, more or less. This is the rear derailleur, and it just bolts on right there. The way these things work, really simple. It's a chain or a cable and a spring. So you go to shift gears here, you do that, and it's going to pull on the cable. And when you pull on the cable, which is running through here and hitting this is the cable clamp, is going to pull on the derailleur and move it this way, which is going to shift the gears. Right? It's going to move the chain towards the inside and shift the gear to a bigger gear. And then when you relax this, when you shift down, you're not so much shifting down as relaxing tension on the cable. So you relax tension on the cable and the spring is going to pull it back. And that's all. It's a spring and a cable. It's as simple as that. The cable pulls it one way and the spring pulls it the other. That's how it works. When you move this thing, all you're doing is pulling on the cable or relaxing tension on the cable. The trick with derailleurs, though, is that you have to get them, you have to get the cable tensioned correctly. If the cable is not tensioned correctly, then when you go to shift, it might shift up 2, or not quite shift up 1. So it'll stay in the same position, but it'll make a lot of noise because it's trying to shift, but it hasn't moved far enough to actually do it. Does that make sense? Okay. So there are also 2 other, well, there are 3 other adjustments on a derailleur. You have a barrel adjuster, which is this right here. Front derailleurs typically don't have them. Rear derailleurs typically do. Usually they are on the derailleur itself. Usually in the system for a front derailleur there is a barrel adjuster somewhere. Usually it's right here, which it is. It's right there. And then oftentimes there will be a second barrel adjuster for the rear derailleur on the shifter itself as well. With this bike there's not. So rear derailleurs, it's going to be on the derailleur. Front derailleurs, it's probably going to be on the shifter. Basically all that does is you screw this out, you're unscrewing it counterclockwise, and that's going to tighten the cable up a little bit. So let's say last time you rode it was like 50 degrees, and today it's like 80. Your cable's going to slacken a little bit. It's going to stretch a little bit because it's hotter or warmer. So what you would need to do then is unscrew the barrel adjuster, and that will add enough tension to the cable to counteract that stretch. Or as you use the cable, as you use the bike over time, the cables will stretch. So you might have to unscrew it half a turn to counteract that periodically. And then likewise, my bike is doing this right now actually. The last time I rode it, it was like 80, and now it's like 50. So my cable is a little bit too tight because the cable has contracted a little bit. So what I would need to do then is screw in the barrel adjuster, and that will relax tension on the cable a little bit. Half a turn is enough. It really doesn't take much. We're talking a matter of a 1/4 of a millimeter. But with high-end equipment, it makes a difference in how it shifts. With low-end equipment, not so much. Maybe a millimeter will, but you know, a 1/4 turn is going to tighten the cable half a millimeter or a 1/4 millimeter. Then the last thing is that basically just adjusts the cable. So you've got the cable clamp which holds the cable, and the barrel adjuster which is like a fine-tuned adjustment for cable tension without having to use tools for the cable clamp. Then you have the limiting screws, and these act totally independently from the cable. So your cable might be tensioned absolutely perfectly, and you shift all the way up, and maybe the cable or maybe the chain falls off on the inside. So what's going on there, you know what I mean by falls off on the inside, falls off in the back. So what's going on there is that the limit of movement is too far. And so these limiting screws adjust the maximum limit of the range of movement of the derailleur. So if you go to shift all the way up and it won't make it to the largest inside cog, each individual sprocket in the rear is called cog, then it probably means the limiting screw is adjusted so that the limit is not far enough. So you unscrew it a little bit, and the limit will be a little bit further out, and then it'll release it. Unscrew it a little more, the limit will be even further, and then it'll start maybe trying to come off on the inside. That's going to be the low-end limiting screw, and there's always, almost always, sometimes it's rubbed off, but usually you can see it, there's going to be an L and an H. So the L is going to be your low-end limiting screw adjustment, and the H is going to be your high-end limiting screw adjustment. And the way I remember that is the H, the high, is harder to pedal. H, high, harder, just H's. There's not really an easy way to do it with the low.
So if your chain is going into your wheel, off your cog, and so you would need to adjust your low limiting screw.
Correct. And
in order to adjust it, you would release. You would screw counterclockwise or clockwise in order. Is that universal? Or?
Sometimes I feel like sometimes it's different. You can usually, like here, you can actually see what's going on. So these are the limiting screws, and this is the high end. So it's pushing on this piece of metal right here. You see that? Everybody see that? And this is the low end. Clearly, it's not activating the low end limit because it's not shifted into the low end. Right now it's in the high end. That's another thing you need to remember, is when you do adjust a limiting screw, it needs to be shifted into that maximum position using the shifter. Otherwise, you're not going to see it do anything. It will still make the adjustment and have an effect, but you're not going to see what that effect is unless you have it positioned so that the screw is pushing on the appropriate tab. So this would be the high end, and then you can see if you look at this screw end and this tab right here, you see it hitting that now? So if you unscrew it, the limit is going to become further inward. It's going to be further that way. If you screw it in, it's going to push it back this way for the low end. And for the high end, it looks like, you just look at it and see, if you screw it in, the high end is going to push it in this way. Screw it in, it's going to push it that way. And if you unscrew it, it's going to come this way. So, that's how a derailleur works. Front and rear derailleurs work exactly the same. There are limiting screws on both of them. Oftentimes, the front derailleur limiting screws are easier to see. We've got a sign that says it usually does that, if you're wondering. Front derailleur limiting screws, you can usually see very easily what they're hitting and how they're functioning. So it's a little easier to wrap your brain around how to adjust them appropriately. Rear derailleurs, this one's really easy to see. Sometimes you can't see them at all. You just have to know what they do or try it and see what it does. And if it's wrong, go the other way. It's that simple. You're not like going to break anything if you screw it in the wrong way. It's just going to make the problem worse. But to fix it, all you have to do is realize that you're going the wrong way and then go the other way. Really easy.
Do you have to be in the lowest gear in order to adjust the low end screw?
You do not have to be in the lowest gear to adjust it, but you do have to be in the lowest gear in order to adjust it and see what it's doing. Right?
Right.
Because if it's not, then it's not going to be pressing against the tab,
right.
Although you are still going to be screwing in the screw or screwing out the screw.
So do you usually, adjust, like shift to the low end to adjust
If I need
the low.
to adjust the low end,
Yeah.
then I will shift the derailleur as far as I can get it
Right.
that way. And then when you screw it in, you'll see it move. It's really small adjustments, but you'll see it. Okay, so that's how derailleurs work. So now we need to install them, because we can't put the chain on until the derailleurs are on, because the chain has to run through the derailleurs. So, really, really easy. You have a bolt. You have a derailleur. You have a hole. The bolt goes through on the derailleur. You have a hole that the bolt is going to screw into. You screw the bolt into the bolt hole. It's that easy. Now, it does matter the position. So, if you look, you can see there's like this kind of tab thing down here on the derailleur hanger. And if you look on the derailleur itself, you'll see there's a tab right here on the derailleur. See that? So, what do you think? We need the tabs to line up. A lot of people don't know about the tabs or forget about the tabs. But you just need them to press on against each other. Okay. Simple as that. Rear derailleur is installed. Now it's not going to look like that once we have the chain on. It's going to do that number, which looks probably a little more familiar. There's a spring in there that's moving it all back. And the front derailleur. These, I think that there probably is like a rule to how to put them, where to put them on the frame. I usually just eyeball it, and if it works, then it works. And if it doesn't work, then you move it and you adjust it. Generally what you're looking for though is, this is what's called a clamp on, by the way. Clamps around the frame. Generally what you're looking for though is you want it positioned as straight as possible, parallel with the frame, and also as close. You can see that this piece is higher than this piece. You want this outer piece to be kind of, not touching, but pretty close to like kind of right on top of the larger chain ring. So you'll end up with something like that. And when we put the chain on and something's funny, it's not like once it's on you can never move it. You can just unscrew it, move it, play with it, get it where it needs to be.
Does it pretty much just need to not rub?
It needs to not rub, yeah, and it needs to be straight. It is not. Yeah, it just needs to not rub and it needs to be parallel with the frame. So if you want to like come up and look and see how I've got it, it's maybe just a touch low. Try that. See what that does later. That might be a touch high, but we'll leave it there and see what it does.